Today we're going to cover Measures of Central Tendency Part 2. So this will go with Chapter 15 for Advanced Math or Chapter 10 for regular math. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is quartiles. So when you think about quartiles, think about quarters or 4 parts. So quartiles divide data sets into 4 parts. To find the quartiles, first place the numbers in order from least to greatest. Next, find the median of the data set. This is quartile 2. Finally, find the median of the lower half and the median of the upper half, and that would be quartile 1 and quartile 3. To find the interquartile range, also known as the IQR, you simply must find the difference between quartile 1 and quartile 3. So take the values of quartile 1, quartile 3, and subtract them. You can use the minimum, maximum, and quartile values to make a box and whisker plot, which we'll look at in a minute. The next thing is the mean absolute deviation, or also known as MAD. To find the mean absolute deviation, we find the mean of the data set, the average. Then we must find the absolute value from each piece of data to the mean. Lastly, we find the deviation or average of the data from step 2. So essentially, in step 2, we are finding out the difference or the distance between each piece of data and the average from the original problem. Remember that distance is always positive. That's why we say the absolute value. Then we take all of those absolute values and average them. Let's take a look at a couple examples. I'm going to start by doing number 2 with you, and then we're going to go back and you're going to try number 1 on your own. So the directions say find the quartiles and IQR. Use that data to make a box and whisker plot, and then find the MAD for each problem. So let's start by listing the data in order from least to greatest. So we're going to list these pieces of data from least to greatest. Now that we've listed them in order from least to greatest, we need to find the median. So the median will give us quartile 2. So remember, we can kind of mark off 1 on each side until we get to the middle. We have 2 numbers in the middle, so we have to find the mean or the average of those 2 numbers. So remember that we add them together and we divide them by 2. 57 plus 88 is 145. And 145 divided by 2 is 72.5. So I'm going to label this as Q2. That's our median or quartile 2. Now we need to go back and look at the lower half and the upper half of the data. So again, 1 on each side until you get to the middle is quartile 1. On the upper half, 1 on each side till you get to the middle is quartile 3. So we can list these. We have 28 as quartile 1, 72.5 as quartile 2, and 94 as quartile 3. Now, to find the IQR, we simply subtract Q3 minus Q1, or 94 minus 28, to get 66. So 66 is the IQR. Now we're going to use this information to make a box and whisker plot. So I'm going to start by drawing a number line as straight as possible. And I need to number it in increments going that I can encompass 22 to 99. So I'm going to count by tens starting at 20. All the way up to 100. And I might have made my number line a little too big, but that's okay. You'd rather have too much room. All right. Now, I'm going to give you a minute to finish up your number line. Now that you've finished your number line, you are going to start plotting your data. So you're going to start by putting points at your minimum value and your maximum value. So 22 is about here. So this is my minimum. My maximum is 99, and that goes here. Now, you're going to make a point at your quartile 1, quartile 2, and quartile 3. So quartile 3, quartile 2, and then quartile 1. Now, it doesn't have to be exact, but they should be pretty close. And I'm going to label them here so you know where these points came from. Now, to make a box and whisker plot, we're going to use these 5 points. So we are going to start by drawing a box around the 3 middle points. Now, my drawing isn't perfect, but we're going to draw a box like this. So from the quartile 1 to the quartile 3 makes a rectangular box, and we put a line through quartile 2. So it looks like 2 rectangles. They could be the exact same size, but most often they will be 2 different sizes. Then from quartile 3 to the max and minimum to quartile 1, we draw a line between the points. Those are our whiskers. So this is why we call it a box and whisker plot. We have the box and then we have the whiskers. And this just shows our data in a visual representation. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to erase some of this because we're going to need some more room. So I'm going to erase and then we're going to move on to the MAD. So go ahead and start finding the mean of the data. So finding the average of the data for problem number 2. All right, now I have started my average here as well. So we are adding all 8 pieces of data, dividing by 8. If you added correctly, I believe you should end up with 519 divided by 8, which will get you 64.875. And this is that mean or average. Now, we need to take each piece of the data and find the absolute value of the difference between the mean and the piece of data. So I'm going to make a list over here. And we are going to start with the first piece of data. So 22 minus the 64.875, and then we need the absolute value of that. And it's going to keep going in the same pattern. So 28 minus 64.875, absolute value, and you're going to keep going. So go ahead, I'm going to pause this. You're going to make your list, I'm going to make my list, and then we're going to come back together. All right, now that we've made our list of problems, we are finding the absolute value of the difference between each of our pieces of data and the mean of the data. So you can now go through and find the absolute value. So when I subtract these, I get negative 42.875. The absolute value of that would be 42.875. Here, negative 36.875. Absolute value makes it positive because remember that the distance is always positive. And we can keep going. So when I subtract, my absolute value is 22.875 and so forth. You're going to finish this list right now and then we're going to come back together. Now that you've finished finding the absolute value of the data, we need to find the average of this. So we are going to add these together. So we're going to find the sum. So I'm just going to show that we're going to add these all together. And when we add these all together, we end up with 221. Now, we are going to take that and I'm going to go back up here for the MAD. And we know that our sum of data is 221 and that there are 8 pieces of data. So 221 divided by 8 will give us 27.625. So we have a mean of 64.875 and a mean absolute deviation of 27.625. So what this is saying is this is the average of our data. This number is the distance away, the average distance away from the data. So how far apart are they all spread? Now, I'm going to pause the video and I want you to take 5 or 10 minutes to try to complete number 1, going back and looking at number 2 when you need help, and then come back when you're ready, and then we're going to go over number 1 so you know that you have the correct information. All right, I've went ahead and started number 1 so that way you can check your work with mine. So listed my order or my data in order from least to greatest, found the median for quartile 2, the median of the lower half for quartile 1, and the median of the upper half for quartile 3. I then found the IQR, or the interquartile range, by subtracting Q3 and Q1 to end up with 56. I then took that data and made my box and whisker plot. So here, to save space, I counted by tens. On my paper, I actually counted by fours for a little bit more in-depth information. As long as you're counting correctly in your graph to picture information, it doesn't quite matter your intervals here on your graph. I would make sure that they're not too large though. Okay, you want to make sure that they're pretty precise. I then plotted my minimum, quartile 1, quartile 2, quartile 3, and my maximum, and drew my box and my whiskers. Now here you're going to see that there isn't a whisker on the right. That's because my quartile 3 and my maximum data are the same. So the 1 point represents both pieces. So there's nowhere to draw that whisker to. The next step would then be to find the average. So we're going to add to find the sum of the data and divide it by 7 since there are 7 pieces. When I added to find my data, the sum of my data, I found that the sum of the data is 364 divided by 7 gives us a mean of 52. Now, keep in mind that we are now going to find the absolute value of the difference between the data pieces and our average. So I'm going to start by making a list of my problems, starting with the first one. So 22 minus 52, the absolute value of that, and I'm going to keep going. Now that I have found the absolute value of the distance between the data pieces and my average, I can then add these. Once I add these, I found that my sum was 154. And again, we have 7 pieces of data. 154 divided by 7 is 22. So 22 is the mean absolute deviation.